That morning, our room was so quiet that every breath seemed unnecessary. Everyone was waiting for a blessing, but I felt a strange chill rising slowly from the floor, even though the July sun was blazing outside. The air smelled of palm oil, freshly baked bread, and the heavy scent of new boots. I stood in front of the mirror, not recognizing my own reflection. The white dress of thick cremplin, bought by my father at a considerable premium in the district center, hung tightly on me, restricting every movement. My shirt, heavy and scratchy, pulled at my temples, but I didn't complain. I rarely complained. At 19, life seemed like a road with apple trees in bloom on either side, and ahead of me waited Victor, the most handsome guy in the entire area. "Nadenka, it's time," Mother said quietly. Maria entered the room sideways, as if apologizing for her presence. In her hands she carried, carefully, as if it were her most precious treasure, an ancient icon of Our Lady of Kazan. The frame had darkened with age, but the face of the Virgin Mary looked stern and clear. Ivan Petrovich walked heavily behind Mother. Father wore a dress jacket that smelled of shag and old chest. His face, weathered by years of work on the collective farm, seemed frozen. "Get on your knees, daughter," her father said quietly. Nadia sank down onto the rug. She saw her mother's fingers trembling. Maria raised the icon above her daughter's head. Her lips moved silently in prayer. The room became so silent that you could hear a bumblebee buzzing outside the window, beating against the glass. And at that moment, something happened that would be discussed in the village for decades. Her mother's hands suddenly weakened. She didn't scream, didn't gasp. Her fingers simply unclenched, as if they were seized by a cramp. The icon fell heavily onto the painted floor. The sound of impact was short and frightening. The glass covering the frame cracked. It didn't shatter, but became covered with a dense network of cracks that converged right on the face of the Mother of God. Maria gasped and pressed her palms to her lips. Her father froze. His thick eyebrows drew together at the bridge of his nose. Nadia looked at the broken glass and felt like a sticky, sickening cold was spreading inside her, somewhere right under her heart. "Mom!" she whispered. Granny Anisha, a neighbor who had been called to help with the holiday table, peeked out from behind her father. She quickly crossed herself, and her faded eyes widened. "Bad omen, Nadia," she croaked so that every word made Nadia shudder. "You won't have Lotta in the house. Oh, run, girl, before it's too late. You're letting trouble into the house." "Shut up, old woman," Ivan Petrovich barked. His voice was sharp, commanding. "Why are you standing there? Put away the glass, wrap the icon in a towel. The last thing you need is to ruin the celebration because of women's superstitions. The groom at the gate is already blasting his accordion for the whole street to hear. Everyone to the table." He jerked Nadia up by the elbow. Her father's grip was strong, accustomed to hard work. Nadia stood up, feeling her legs turn to cotton wool. Fear, cold and sharp, settled inside, but she obediently straightened her shoulders. In this family, it was not customary to contradict her father. The wedding feast hummed and roared, knowing no bounds. In the village club, the tables were laden with food. Large platters displayed ruddy chicken pies with fish, from which thick steam rose. There were bowls of jellied meat, mountains of homemade pickles, and decanters of clear moonshine. The accordionist, he tore at the furs. The ditties grew louder, and the guests grew drunker. Victor sat next to Nadia, and his presence filled the entire space. He was dazzling. His black hair was combed back, his eyes sparkled. He laughed a lot, winked at his friends, and from time to time he placed his hand on Nadia's shoulder in a possessive manner. "Well, wife?" he asked when the newlyweds' dance was announced. He led her to the center of the room. The guests parted, clapping their hands. Victor put his arm around her waist. Nadia involuntarily shuddered. His palm was too heavy, and his fingers dug into her side so hard that it became difficult to breathe. It didn't feel like a lover's embrace, it was a capture. They whirled to the sounds of a waltz, and Nadia tried to smile, as befits a bride. But Victor suddenly pulled her close, so that she felt the heat of his body and the sharp smell of acetylcholine mixed with tobacco. "Listen to me, Nadia," he whispered in her ear. His voice became low and harsh. "You are mine now, down to the last hair. If you look at someone the wrong way, if you talk to someone without asking, you will regret it. I will get you from under the ground if you try to fool me. I love you so much I could kill you. Understand?" He squeezed her ribs even harder, and Nadia felt a sharp pain. She looked up at him, expecting a joke, but Victor's face was serious and motionless. "Vitya, it hurts," she stammered. He immediately relaxed his grip and smiled broadly again, noticing Nadia's father looking at them. "Be patient, Nadia. I have such passion," he said loudly, so everyone could hear. And Nadia believed him. She so wanted to believe that this rudeness was just the flip side of great love. The first 6 months of their life together passed in a strange, viscous fog. They lived in a small house that Victor called his own, although Nadia knew it belonged to his uncle. Victor forbade her to go to work at the collective farm office. "A man should provide for his family," he declared, buttoning his shirt. "Your job is to cook cabbage soup and wait for your husband. You shouldn't be hanging around among strange men." But there was almost no money in the house. Victor left early in the morning and returned late, often frighteningly silent. When Nadia cautiously inquired about his earnings, he simply waved her off. "Mind your own business, Nadia. I'll bring you everything you need." His jealousy grew quickly and greedily. If Nadia lingered at the well an extra minute, she'd be interrogated at home. Victor didn't shout. He sat across from her and looked at her with a heavy, unblinking gaze. "What were you talking about with the cashier? Who was looking at you?" Nadia made excuses, feeling guilty for something she hadn't done. She became quiet, trying to walk without looking up. Her world narrowed to the size of 4 walls. One day, after Victor left, Nadia decided to tidy up the blue. Something fell out of her husband's old boot. It was a bundle of rough fabric. Inside was a passport in someone else's name and a long knife with a faint compound handle. The blade gleamed dully in the dim light. A palpable danger emanated from the knife. At that moment, the gate slammed. Victor was entering through the hay. Seeing the package in her hands, his expression instantly changed. His eyes narrowed. In one leap, he was at her side. He simply snatched the knife and passport from her, squeezing her by the handle so tightly that Nadia screamed, "Where are you going?" He hissed, "I told you not to touch my things. I'll see you again. You'll regret being born." Nadia sat by the window all evening. She understood that Victor was hiding something terrible. But in the village, divorce was considered shameful, and she already knew she was pregnant. The winter of 1975 was harsh. Nadia was 4 months pregnant. Victor had been on edge lately, often escaping into the night and returning gloomy and angry. That night, Nadia was sleeping lightly. A sudden crash wrenched her from her reverie. The door to the house swung open with such a bang that the walls seemed to shake. Nadia jumped out of bed, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Everyone stay where you are." "Police." A loud voice filled the room. Uniformed men burst into the house, turning on a bright light. Victor was immediately tackled to the floor. "Krukov, Victor Sergeyevich, you are under arrest." A search began. The police acted quickly. They emptied drawers and shook out bed linens. Nadia stood in the corner in just her nightgown. The cold from the open door crept into the room, biting at her legs. She saw curious neighbors peering through the windows. News of the arrest spread instantly. Nadia felt those gazes on her, filled with pity and malice. "Vitya, what's going on?" She screamed, but he didn't answer. Victor was led to the exit. He was shoved into a gray police UAZ. The car's engine roared loudly. Nadia jumped out onto the porch. She didn't feel the cold, didn't notice that she was running barefoot through the snow. "Vitya, this is a mistake." She screamed after the car. She ran until she fell into a snowdrift. The car disappeared around the corner, leaving behind only the smell of gasoline and silence. Nadia lay in the snow, looking at the sky. She didn't yet know that her life had changed forever, but she felt that the old Nadia had died here, and the new one would have to become very strong. The investigator's office at the district police station smelled of the sour smell of tea, ink, and the institutional coal. Outside, February snow was falling in gray flakes. Nadezhda sat on the edge of a hard chair. Her belly, already noticeably rounded, now seemed like a separate world, one that demanded protection. The investigator leafed through the folder for a long time, not looking at her. "So, Kryukovo?" He finally raised his head. "Are we going to sort this out or continue playing hide-and-seek? You knew your husband wasn't hiding at his uncle's for nothing, right?" Nadia shook her head. Her voice faded. A dry lump lodged in her throat. He'd said, "I came here on business." The investigator chuckled. "On business?" In the neighboring district, he nearly drove a young man to his grave at a dance. He cut him deeply with a Finnish knife. The guy miraculously survived, but was left disabled, and your Vitko went on the run. We searched for him for 6 months, and he hid at your place." Nadia felt the air in the office tighten. The investigator's words fell heavily and terrifyingly. She remembered that very knife and her husband's cold gaze. "So he's a criminal," she said barely audibly. "The prisoner is now my hope. He's earned 3 years in a penal colony so you can dry your crackers." Although he softened for a moment, looking at her stomach. "You're lucky, girl. With a character like his, he would have hurt you sooner or later. Think about that when you start packing up the parcels." Returning to her native village became a path of shame for her. The neighbors didn't turn away. They watched her go, whispering behind the gates. Father Ivan Petrovich was waiting for her on the porch. He stood with his legs wide apart, his face gloomy, filled with heavy anger. Mother Maria loomed in the depths of the blue, furtively wiping her eyes. She arrived. Her father's voice was devoid of pity. She looked her husband in the eyes. "Vitya, they gave him 3 years. Dad, I don't care how much they gave him." Ivan Petrovich stepped forward. "You've dragged our family name through the mud. We've lived honestly our whole lives. And now what? Your son-in-law is a criminal. You've disgraced the family name. Now you'll have to deal with it yourself. I won't let you in. Go back where you came from." Nadia looked at her mother, seeking support. But Maria only lowered her head, not daring to contradict her husband. Nadia turned and wandered away. The door slammed behind her with a heavy thud, the same one that had always been open for her before. Her last refuge was her mother-in-law's house. Antonina Petrovna greeted her coolly. She was sitting at the table, straight and cold. "Sat down?" she asked. "For 3 years, Mom." Her mother-in-law put down her knitting. Her gaze pierced Nadia. "What were you waiting for, Vitenka? My guy is proud. He needs freedom. And you?" Her voice laced with venom. "You, Nadia, are a weak woman. You couldn't tie your husband to the house? It's your fault. He couldn't find peace in you." Nadia listened silently to the accusations. She wanted to scream, but she only clenched her fingers tighter. There was only the obligation to endure. Alyosha was born at the end of November 1975. Nadezhda remembered that day as an endless journey through a snowy wasteland. Contractions began early in the morning. The frost was so cold that the trees in the forest cracked. Nadia left the cold house, a 5-kilometer hole in the house. She walked, stopping every 10 minutes and pressing her back against the birch trees. No one met her. The labor was long. When they showed her the baby, Nadia felt only quiet determination. "I won't give you up. We will survive." On the 3rd day, there was a knock on the window of the hospital room. Maria was standing behind the glass. She was wrapped in a shawl. Her face was red from the cold. Seeing her daughter, she quickly looked back and put her finger to her lips. Maria gestured to the windowsill outside. There lay a bundle. It contained warm diapers, butter, and several homemade pies. Nadia hugged them to her chest. They were still warm. Maria made the sign of the cross over the window and quickly disappeared, fearing her husband's wrath. Life after the birth of her son turned into an exhausting marathon. Nadia went to work on the collective farm when Alyosha was only 2 months old. Early in the morning, she carried her son in the nursery. The work was hard. She dragged sacks. Her hands were covered in rough calluses. By evening, her back ached so much that she couldn't straighten up. And that's when the letters began to arrive. "Hello, my faithful Nadia." Here, behind the barbed wire, I realized what I've lost. Forgive me for the pain. Only the thought of you and my son keeps me from perishing here. I'll go out and carry you in my arms. The words in the letter were beautiful. Nadia reread them 10 times. She wanted to believe. This letter didn't contain the victor who had squeezed her ribs. There was another man, an ideal husband. She began to live by this image. She wrote him long replies, sent parcels, taking everything she had. A conflict with her mother-in-law flared up in the fall. Alyosha was 1 year old, he needed warm boots. Nadia had been saving up kopecks for 3 months. Antonina Petrovna came in without knocking. Nadia had a letter from Vitenka. His cough was really bad. He needs food. Lard, honey? They can't cope without it. Nadia looked at the money on the table. This is all I have, Mom. My son is already too cold to buy shoes. Her mother-in-law pursed her lips. Shoes? The kid will sit there in his old felt boots and his father will be coughing up blood. Who are you thinking about? Your husband is your support. Do you really feel sorry for the man who suffers for you? Nadia slowly handed over the money. She still believed in the light in the window, but inside, a weariness began to grow. The weariness of a woman who realized that her life was an endless sacrifice for a man she didn't really know. The autumn of 1978 was protracted, with sticky, damp fogs and clouds, heavy as lead, clinging to the treetops. The platform of the regional train station smelled of creosote, burnt diesel fuel and rotting wet leaves, the smell of separation and longing. I stood at the very edge of the platform, clutching 2-year-old Alyosha tightly to me. A boy in a heavy sheepskin hat, slipping over his eyes, and a coat too big for him to grow into, looked around in bewilderment, sensing my nervous, electric tremor. The train from the regional center approached with a choking thud, a heavy creaking and billowing clouds of greasy, hissing steam. When the car doors clanged open, I involuntarily leaned forward, almost stepping over the edge. I had imagined this moment so many times. So many nights I had reread his letters, memorizing his tender words, that in my imagination he had already transformed into a hero, a reformed, yearning, tender husband, broken by fate but healed by my love. Victor was the last to step onto the platform. He didn't leap lightly and springily as before, but slowly, heavily descended the steps, carrying a battered fiber suitcase. I froze, and my heart skipped a beat. It was him, and yet it wasn't him at all. Victor had lost a lot of weight. His face had acquired an unhealthy, grayish-earthy hue, and his cheekbones had become sharp, as if covered in dry, parchment-like skin. But the most frightening thing was his gaze, piercing, heavy, from under his brows. It lacked the sparkle I had once fallen in love with. He looked at the world as if he were already searching for an enemy, expecting a trick from every bush. Vitya. I took a hesitant step forward, feeling the smile freeze on my lips. He stopped, looked me up and down with an appraising, cold gaze, and a crooked, unpleasant smirk appeared on his lips. When he spoke, I was overcome by the sharp, suffocating smell of shafir and cheap, pungent tobacco. His teeth had turned yellow, and a chipped crown was visible on one of his front teeth. "Well, hello, wife." His voice was hoarse, smoky, and alien. Alyosha, sensing a stranger, hid his face in my shoulder in fear, and then, remembering my endless stories about my kind dad, Robka hopefully extended his small, mittened hand toward Victor. Victor didn't even flinch. He merely winced in disgust, as if he had a toothache, and moved slightly away so the child wouldn't touch him. "What are you looking at, little wolf?" He snapped at his son, and there wasn't a drop of paternal warmth in his voice, only irritation. "Nadia, give me a light, if you have one, or at least a match. My ears are swollen." At that moment my crystal castle, which I had built brick by brick for 3 years from prison letters and my hopes, crumbled into fine gray dust. Standing before her wasn't her beloved husband, but a strange, embittered man who not only didn't need me, but was a burden to him. The first week at home was a test of my endurance. Victor didn't go to my father to apologize, as I'd hoped. He spent entire days lying on the sofa in his coat, chain-smoking, flicking the ashes onto the floor, and staring at the ceiling with a heavy, unblinking gaze. He didn't go near Kolyosha, as if the child didn't even exist in this house. Only occasionally would he hiss at him if his son started making noise with his toys. The thunder struck on Wednesday. Victor returned from the village council angry, his face twisted with rage. He threw his cap into the corner, so much so that the cat darted under the stove. "That's it," he sighed. "They won't give us life here. The local police officer comes to me every day as if it were work. Nadia is on duty. One step to the right, one step to the left, and I'm back under guard. They said, live quietly, work on the collective farm, throw manure. But I'm not a bull to bend my back for sticks in front of those mugs. Vitya, but Daddy promised to help if you got a job." The little Yaroslav began. "Your daddy dreams of throwing me out behind the fence," Victor barked, and I flinched at the sharp sound. "Listen to me carefully. I called the guys I was in prison with. I need to go north to Siberia. They need hands in the logging there. There's a shortage of people. The pay is good, a long ruble, but they turn a blind eye to the past. There they'll give you a house and a starting point. Here I am, a prisoner, an outcast, but there I'll be a man. I felt cold inside when I went to Siberia. My legs weakened. With a small child. Vitya, Alyosha, is still a baby. He gets sick often. Where are we going in the taiga? Here is Mom. The garden? Everything is ours. Lived in. I said, let's go." Victor stepped close to me, looming over me, and I saw the blue veins swell in his neck. "Are you my wife or what? Where I go, you go." I swore an oath in the Legislative Assembly. "Or do you want me to rot here under the fence to the delight of your daddy?" I rushed to my parents' house. I hoped for my father's sternness, for his affection for his grandson, that he wouldn't allow us to be led away into the unknown. Ivan Petrovich sat in the room, mending his horse armor. He listened to me silently, without looking up from his work. "Papa, he wants to take us north. To the taiga, to the wilderness. Help? Give him a weighty word." I cried, clinging to his hard, tar-smelling knee. Ivan Petrovich put down the awl. His gaze was dry, motionless, and terrifying. A wife should be with her husband, his hope. You chose this path yourself when you went against my will for him. Now bear your cross and don't complain. I don't interfere in other people's families, my husband said. If you're going to go, then pack your bags and go. I won't let you disgrace me by returning a second time, running back and forth. You're a lost cause, my daughter. Go. Maria, standing by the stove, covered her face with the edge of her apron. Her shoulders shook silently, but she didn't utter a word. I realized there was no protection. My whole world, everything I considered home and my backyard, was pushing me out into the cold. Following the man, I trembled with fear. The journey north took almost 2 weeks and seemed like an endless descent into hell. Trains, transfers at godforsaken stations, waiting rooms reeking of bleach, wet felt boots, and other people's misfortune. The further east the train traveled, the harsher, the more merciless the landscape outside the murky window became. The welcoming birch groves gave way to a gray, endless taiga, oppressed by a low sky. A logging camp greeted us in the polar night. It was a strange, frightening place. The sharp black silhouettes of the fir trees, dim lanterns swaying in the wind, and endless, crisp snow that seemed never to melt. We were housed in a workers' barracks, a long, squat building made of timber darkened by time and moisture. Inside, it was stuffy and damp. It smelled of musty clothes, cheap smoked pork, sauerkraut, and burnt fat. It was the smell of poverty and despair. The room they assigned us was tiny, no more than 12 square meters. The furniture consisted of an iron bedstead with a wire mesh, a rickety table, and 2 rough stools. Mold blackened the corners of the walls, and the single, ice-covered window blew such a chill that the water in the mug on the table was coated in a thin layer of ice by morning. Nothing. Victor looked around the apartment without taking off his jacket and rubbed his hands, but he had more willpower. No one here would ask where you were last night, or what you drank. The neighbors behind the thin plywood partition didn't stop until the morning. Hoarse male voices, the clink of bottles, a woman's whiskey turning into drunken sobbing. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the sleeping Alyosha to me, wrapping him in a downy shawl, and staring into space. At -45 degrees, even a trip to the wooden outhouse outside turned into a dangerous, torturous expedition. This wasn't the new life he sang about in his letters. It was a trap, its jaws clamped on my leg. The first blood was spilled a month after his arrival. It was Saturday. Victor returned home late from work. I saw that he had already had a drink with his shift workers. His movements were excessively abrupt, sweeping, and his gaze was cloudy, heavy, filled with bad blood. I silently, trying not to make a noise, served dinner on the table. I managed to bake a fish pie in the communal kitchen, despite the cold and the neighbors' curses, a chicken pie, his favorite. Victor sat down, took a piece, bit into it, and immediately threw it back into the tin bowl with force. Crumbs scattered across the table. "What is this rubbish?" he asked quietly, dangerously. "Vitya, this is fresh fish. The flour is good," I tried. I felt how everything inside was compressed into a tight, painful knot. "Don't look me in the eye when I ask questions." Suddenly he barked so loudly that Alyosha, playing with a piece of wood on the floor, screamed and dropped the toy. "You sit here all day, sir. You'll eat up my money, and my hungry husband has to chew straw. The dough is raw, the fish is bony. I'm working, Vitya. I've been washing floors at the office since morning. Alyoshka was placed in the nursery. I didn't have time to finish my sentence." Victor stood up slowly, heavily, like a bear rising. He didn't swing for a wide blow, like they do in drunken village brawls. He struck short, professionally, precisely to the body, the way they teach in prison cells, to break a person's will but leave no obvious marks on the face for the police. The blow landed under the solar plexus. I gasped. The air instantly whistled out of my lungs. Everything went dark before my eyes. I fell to my knees, clutching the edge of the table with my hands, trying to breathe, but I couldn't. The pain was overwhelming, nauseating. Alyosha froze for a moment, looking at his fallen mother, his eyes wide with horror. He didn't cry. Silently, without a sound, he quickly scurried under the bed, like an animal. He huddled in the farthest, darkest corner, pressing his back against the cold wall and covering his ears with his small hands as hard as he could. Victor stood over me for a minute, breathing heavily, reeking of fumes. Then he sat back down at the table, poured himself some vodka from the bottle, and drank it down in one gulp, without even wincing so I wouldn't hear it again, he said, not looking at his wife writhing on the floor. "Know your place, Nadka. You're nothing here. A nobody. Without me, you'll freeze to death in this taiga within an hour. The wolves won't find your bones. Understand?" I couldn't answer. I just gasped like a fish thrown onto ice. An icy chill spread through my body, more terrible than any Siberian frost. I realized the letters were a lie from the first to the last word. The man who's now sitting at my table, chewing bread, really could kill me and not blink an eye. And the worst part, there was nowhere to run. Beyond the thin barracks door, an indifferent, deadly snowy void, stretched for thousands of kilometers. By early 1979, I had mastered the art of invisibility. I moved around our cramped, frozen room silently, like a shadow, instinctively guessing Victor's mood by the sound of his footsteps in the barracks hallway. I knew every creaky floorboard and avoided them. I knew how to breathe without irritating him. The logging camp lived by its own harsh, wolfish rules. They didn't like unnecessary questions here, and the dark circles under the women's eyes were regarded as an inevitable part of northern life, as familiar as snow or mashkara. But one day, my patience ran out. I chose the day when Victor left for a long shift at Dedelyanu and, mustering the last of my resolve, headed to the police station. The local police officer, Semyonov, a heavy-set man with a flabby face the color of raw meat, sat at a desk littered with yellowed forms. The office was stiflingly hot. An old electric kettle rattled shrilly on the windowsill among the dusty hirons. The air smelled of stale sweat and cheap tobacco. "What's wrong, Kryukovo?" Semyonov didn't even look up, continuing to enthusiastically cross out something on his report card. "Stepan Yegorovich." I clasped my fingers under the table so tightly that they turned white and they creaked. "I'm talking about Victor. He's beating me. He's beating me to death. And he's threatening Alyoshka, raising his hand. Life is no longer in the police station. I'm afraid he'll kill us in the heat of the moment. There's no escape." Semyonov finally put his pen down and looked at me. His cloudy, watery eyes held neither sympathy nor any official interest. Only the endless, viscous boredom of a man whose tea is being interrupted. "Beats, you say?" He lazily scratched the back of his head. "And what for? A man wouldn't just throw his fists around. Maybe you're giving him a reason. Are you being rude or not keeping up with the housework?" "No reason at all, Stepan Yegorovich. He drinks, and when he's done, he goes wild." His eyes turned glassy. At that moment, the office door swung open with a masterful kick, and Victor appeared on the threshold. I went cold, feeling my heart sink into my stomach. I didn't expect him to return from Dilyana so early. Victor glanced around the room, his lips twisting into that same crooked, mocking smile that always took my breath away. "Oh, and I see my wife's getting educated here. Writing a complaint book." Victor walked into the office, still wearing his hat, and clapped the police officer on the shoulder, Nebraska style. "Hi, Yegorich. You're always working, and you care about the people." "Hi, Vit." Semyonov perked up noticeably, as if seeing an old friend. "Well, your wife just came in and called. She says you're being harsh with her, using physical force." Victor gave a short, barking laugh. He pulled a crumpled pack of Bellamore from his pocket and handed it to the police officer. "Strictly? Is that really harsh, Yegorich?" "I'm just teaching her some sense, so she'll overdo it and watch her tongue. She's got a rustic, stubborn nature, you know. Without a firm man's hand, a woman won't blab." Semyonov took a cigarette, crushed it with relish between his thick fingers, and struck a match. "Nadia, go home," he said, blowing a thick stream of gray smoke toward the ceiling. "Don't air your quarrels in public. Vidka's a decent guy, a hard worker, in good standing with the logging company. He meets quotas. Okay, he drank. Okay, he put his hand in. As a warning, it happens to everyone. It's a family matter, a matter of everyday life. You'll figure it out yourselves. Don't distract the authorities from serious matters." Victor looked at me for a long time, unblinking, through the tobacco haze. I read the sentence in his eyes. I realized that in this village, squeezed between the endless taiga and human indifference, the law didn't exist for me. There were only Victor and his drinking buddies in uniform. The winter of 1979 was particularly harsh and hungry. Victor had drunk away most of his wages back at the sawmill, paying off his card debts. By the end of the month, all that remained in the house was half a sack of frozen potatoes and a little gray, musty flour. Alyosha was already 4 years old. He had become a quiet, timid boy, like a little old man. He could sit for hours in the corner on a chest, playing with a piece of clothesline or an empty spool, and made almost no sound. He rarely asked for food, just staring at me with his huge, sunken eyes, frozen in a mature question. One day, while sorting through an old coat that Aunt Shura had given us to remake, Alyosha found a true treasure in a hole in the lining, a treasured, clumped-up mint candy wrapped in crumpled paper. The boy froze, staring at it as if it were a wonder of the world. He didn't eat it right away. He slowly, reverently unfolded the paper. Inhaling the forgotten sweet scent of sugar and mint, Victor, who had been sitting by the window, trying to mend a torn felt boot, turned his head sharply. The scraping of the awl stopped. "What's rustling there?" His voice was dry, crackling like frost. Alyosha shuddered and tried to hide his fist behind his back. "Nothing, Dad. It's just a piece of paper." Victor tossed the felt boot aside and, in 2 long strides, was at his son's side. He roughly grabbed the child's thin wrist and forcefully pried his fingers apart. The candy, dull and sticky with age, lay in his small, trembling palm. "Are you sharpening the candy?" Victor snatched the sweet. "You're stealing rats without your father knowing." So father comes from Delana, breaking his back, his hands numb from the cold, and here you are, feasting, you parasite. Alyosha didn't cry. He simply watched as his father put the candy in his mouth and slowly, demonstratively crunched it. The crunch of the caramel in the ringing silence of the room sounded like a gunshot to me. "Father needs it more. I work. I support you," Victor snapped, returning to his felt boot and rolling the candy around in his cheek. "Haven't you earned enough to eat sugar yet? Learn to share, puppy." I stood by the stove, clutching the ladle. I looked at my husband's back, and at that moment something inside me finally burned out with a crack. The last pitiful spark of that foolish, sacrificial love that I had so carefully preserved against all odds went out. In its place remained only cold, heavy, tombstone-like hatred. I realized that before me stood not just a cruel man, but a creature devoid of all humanity. At that moment, I stopped fearing him. I began to hate him. In the spring of 1979, when the snow had just begun to settle, turning into a dirty slush, I realized I was pregnant again. This news brought me no joy, only a dull, black despair. Victor, upon learning this, didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Why breed poverty?" he asked indifferently, shaking ashes onto the floor. "We can't feed both of us, and we have nothing to eat ourselves. Get ready, you're going to the hospital tomorrow. For a cleaning." I tried to object, cried, talked about sin, about how we could handle it, that I would work harder. But Victor was adamant. He didn't just force me. He took visible sadistic pleasure in his complete power over my body and my future. The hospital in the district center was cold as a morgue and smelled of bleach and fear. I sat in line on a wooden bench with other women. Their faces were gray, lifeless, as if erased with an eraser. The doctor, a large woman with a heavy chin and indifferent, empty eyes, didn't even look at me during the examination. Last name, age, how many children? The questions fell like hammer blows on nails. The procedure was quick, rough, and humiliating. I lay on a hard chair, looking at the yellow, damp patches on the ceiling, and felt like part of my soul was being ripped out by the roots. The doctor worked mechanically, accompanying her actions with short, disgusted remarks. "Why are you twitching? How delicate. You come running here yourself, spreading your legs, and then rolling your eyes. You should use protection, not breed like cats in a backyard." When it was all over, they threw me out into the hallway, barely alive. My head was spinning. My lower abdomen was on fire. My legs were shaking. Victor was waiting for me at the exit. He was smoking, leaning against a birch tree, and he looked completely ordinary, bored. "Is that all?" he asked, spitting on the ground. "Oh well." The woman will take the sack, the mare will feel better. Go and rest. By evening, so that there will be dinner, the men will come. I followed him, trying not to fall into the mud, and felt that the world around me had completely lost its color. I had become an empty shell. The only person in this odd who didn't turn away from me was Aunt Shura, my neighbor in the barracks. She worked as a nurse at the local clinic, was a blunt, rude woman, smoked strong Bellamore, and knew more about life in the village than the entire police force put together. One evening, when Victor had gone to the garage to figure things out, Aunt Shura knocked on my door. She brought a bowl of sauerkraut and a small jar of cloudy, foul-smelling ointment. "Here, rub your bruises," she muttered, sitting down on a stool and lighting a cigarette. "And Oleshka, take these fish pies. I baked them yesterday. There are some left." The boy, seeing the food, grabbed a pie so greedily that my chest tightened. "Listen to me, Nadka." Shura lowered her voice. Her eyes, surrounded by a thick network of wrinkles, looked serious and hard. "You won't last much longer. I've seen hundreds like your Vitka in 30 years in the hospital. His eyes are dead, fishy. He won't stop. Beating you isn't enough for him. He needs to break you, drink you dry, trample you into the dirt. He'll kill you someday, beat you up when he's drunk, and say that's how it happened. And the police will cover for him. I saw it myself." "Where should I run, Aunt Shura?" I whispered, swallowing tears. "My parents won't accept me. My father has cursed me. I have no money. He won't give me documents. He hid my passport. And don't run where? Run from where?" Shura took a deep drag, releasing a cloud of acrid smoke. "Save your life. Save money, kopeck by kopeck. Sew it into your lining, your underwear, anywhere. I'll help you with tickets. I have a man at the station. Just keep quiet. Not a sound, not an unnecessary look, or it's the end. Remember, you have a son. If you disappear, he will grow up to be the same kind of beast, or they will drive him into the ground." These words of the old nurse became the only straw I clung to. In 1980, I became pregnant again. This time, I decided to keep quiet until the very end. A faint, insane, irrational hope glimmered within me that another child would change something, that it would become a shield. I wanted to believe that in this endless darkness, a new life would be born, one that would be my salvation. I hid my belly under loose robes, tried to avoid Victor's attention, and tightened my belt. But hiding the truth in the cramped barracks room, where everyone's life was on display, was impossible. Victor found out everything on Saturday evening. He came home, especially drunk, angry from a big loss at cards. His gaze immediately fell on my figure. "Why are you so big around the waist?" He came right up to me, his heavy stench of fumes wafting across my face. "What did I tell you again last time?" "Vitya, you've already given up so long." I pressed my back against the wall, covering my belly with my hands. "Let's leave it at that. I'll have a helper, a son or a daughter." Victor didn't shout. He simply grabbed my hair, wrapped my braid around his fist, and yanked me toward him. "Assistant, you're a redundant mouth. You're breeding poverty." He hit me hard in the face. I fell onto the bed, curled up, trying to protect the child. Victor didn't stop. He started kicking me, hard, methodically, with cold calculation, aiming precisely at where, under a layer of fabric and flesh, my little heart would beat. "I'll beat this nonsense out of you," he growled with each blow. "I'll beat it out." Alyosha, huddled in a corner, screamed hysterically, but Victor, without looking, threw the child aside like a toy doll. The pain was unbearable, tearing me apart. I felt something inside me breaking, bursting. Darkness rolled in like a wave, and consciousness began to drift into a gray, sticky haze. I woke up in the hospital. The familiar white ceiling with its cracks, the sharp smell of medicine. My body felt alien, filled with lead and pain. Aunt Shura was sitting on a chair nearby. She was crying silently, only with her eyes. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "The baby is gone. Nadenka, she whispered, stroking my hand. "We barely saved you, girl. You lost a lot of blood. Now you're left empty." I didn't cry. I didn't even have the strength for tears. There was only a scorched, ringing emptiness inside. On the third day, Victor entered the ward. He was clean-shaven, wearing a clean shirt. He smelled of cheap floral cologne. He sat on the edge of my bed as if he owned the place and took my hand. His fingers were icy and damp. "Well, are you alive?" he asked in a completely casual tone, as if nothing had happened. "The doctors say you'll be discharged soon." "Listen to this, Nadia. Don't even think about babbling. Say you fell off the porch, tripped on the ice. Semyonov already knows he's filed a report. He'll confirm it if needed." He leaned close to my ear, and his voice turned into a venomous, hissing whisper. "Just try reporting me. I'm friends with Semyonov. He'll sign any paper, and I'll make sure they lock you up in a mental hospital. I'll lock you up like you're crazy, violent, and say you committed suicide. I'll send Alyoshka to an orphanage. You get me? There they'll quickly explain who his father is and teach him a lesson in life. You'll rot in a mental hospital, and the kid will be in a boarding school." I looked at him and saw neither a husband nor a human being. I saw death itself in human form. At that moment, looking into his empty eyes, I finally understood. Either I leave or he will destroy us both. In my soul, where the pain had been burned away, a cold plan began to grow, clear and merciless, like the Siberian frost. I was no longer a victim. I was a she-wolf, cornered, waiting for the moment to rip the trap's throat out and break free. After being discharged from the hospital, Nadezhda returned to the barracks a different person. It was as if all the fuses responsible for fear and pity had burned out inside her. She no longer cried, no longer cringed at the sight of Victor, no longer tried to justify herself. On the contrary, she had put on the mask he wanted to see, the mask of a submissive, broken woman, aware of her own insignificance. "Vinka, would you like some tea?" she would ask in a soft, even voice, setting the table with a clean oilcloth. At first, Victor eyed her with suspicion, expecting a trick or hidden malice, but Nadia was impeccable. She served dinner on time, cleaned his greasy jacket, and smiled at his dull jokes. This game required colossal effort, but it paid off. Victor relaxed. In his eyes, Nadia had become tamed, finally accepting his authority. Behind this mask, feverish work proceeded. Now every ruble that came into her hands was strictly accounted for. She learned to shortchange her husband on small matters, skimming pennies from his money for groceries. In the evenings when Victor retired to the smoking room or fell asleep after a hard shift, Nadia sat down to sew. She took Alyosha's old padded coat, which Aunt Shura had helped patch up, and with tiny, unnoticeable stitches, she ripped open the lining. There, deep within the gray cotton wool, she sewed the rolled-up rubles. Fives, threes, crumpled ruble notes. These weren't just money, they were kilometers separating her from this hell. Every coin had been snatched from hunger and fear. Aunt Shura, the only one who knew the truth, helped as much as she could. She brought scraps of fabric, old buttons, but underneath them there was always something valuable. A bandage left over from the outpatient clinic, a lump of sugar, information. Zoika will be working at the ticket office at the train station on Thursday. She owes me, Shura whispered, bending over her sewing. I told her my relative would be coming and would get a ticket to Leningrad. She wouldn't ask any unnecessary questions and wouldn't ask for my passport if I asked. The night before the escape was long, like a polar winter. Nadia didn't sleep. She lay with her eyes open, listening to Victor's heavy, intermittent growl. The room smelled of fumes and dampness. On the kitchen table, illuminated by the pale light of a distant lantern, lay a knife, the same large one with the heavy handle. Nadia slowly rose from the bed. The floor was icy, but she didn't feel the cold. She walked to the table and picked up the knife. The metal was indifferent and slippery. A terrible, black thought flashed for a moment in her mind, tormented by years of abuse. One movement, one sharp blow to her sleeping throat, and it would all be over. No need to run, no need to hide, no need to tremble with every knock. She looked at Victor, and her hand, holding the knife, slowly descended toward his chest. In that moment, she realized she was ready to kill. But then she turned her gaze to Alyosha. The boy was sleeping on a narrow chest, his hand tucked under his cheek. He was so small, so defenseless in this vast, hostile taiga. Nadia saw his fingers curl into a tiny fist in his sleep, tightly clenched until they turned white. It was as if he were struggling with someone in his dream, refusing to give in. Nadia froze. She realized that if she stabbed him, they would take her away. Alyosha would be left alone. They would send him to an orphanage, where they would either make him a victim or a beast like his father. She had no right to that easy way out. She put the knife back on the table, and the sound of metal hitting wood seemed like thunder. "We'll leave, son," she whispered under her breath. "We'll live." The next evening was the catalyst. Victor returned from work in that state of quiet rage that always preceded great disaster. He didn't shout. He silently sat down at the table and began sharpening the knife on a whetstone. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The sound cut through the air, making Nadia cringe. Victor stared for a long moment at Alyosha, who was quietly trying to assemble a pyramid in the corner. "You know, Nadia," Victor said, still sharpening the blade. "Tomorrow I'm off. I'll take care of the kid. He'll stop rubbing up your apron. I'll make a man out of him. A belt isn't enough. He needs to build character. Let him come out into the garage with me tomorrow, into the cold. Let him get used to it, and if he whines, I'll shut him up real quick." He ran his finger along the blade of the knife, and a thin line of blood appeared on the skin. He licked it and grinned. Nadia felt her heart skip a beat, and then began to beat heavily, echoing in the very tips of her fingers. She realized that tomorrow Alyosha would either be maimed or broken forever. There was no more time. Waiting for the right moment was tantamount to death. 3 a.m. in the barracks, that shaky, anxious silence that only happens before dawn settled in. The frost outside the window strengthened to 45 degrees. The walls of the barracks occasionally groaned, bursting from the cold. Nadia got out of bed. Her movements were measured and precise, like a surgeon's. She went to Alyosha and touched his shoulder. "Son, be quiet, we're going for a walk," she whispered in his ear. The boy opened his eyes. There was no sleep in them, only a momentary understanding. He knew that mother's voice. He knew that now was not the time to ask questions. Nadia began dressing him. One pair of wool pants, the other of warm leggings tucked into wool socks. A padded coat with money sewn into it, a heavy lambskin hat. She wrapped a long, prickly scarf around his neck so that only his eyes were visible. Then she began to get ready herself. Her hands wouldn't obey. Her fingers felt like wood. She pulled on 2 sweaters and a heavy coat. Victor stirred on the bed. He mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over onto his side. Nadia froze, almost stopping breathing. Her felt boots stood right next to her husband's bed. To take them, she would have to step into his reach. Victor sobbed again in his sleep and stretched out his hand, almost touching the boots. Nadia realized that if she reached for the boots, he would wake up. She made a decision instantly. She scooped Alyosha up in her arms and tiptoed out into the cold hay. There, in the corner, stood a pair of old rubber boots, slippers lined with shabby fur. She shoved her feet into them, even with their wool socks on. It was tantamount to suicide in such cold, but there was no choice. The key turned in the lock with a screeching sound. Nadia thought the whole village heard the sound. She rushed out the door and slammed it, pressing her back against the icy beam. The world around her greeted her with a searing, icy silence. The air was so thick and sharp that every breath felt like a sip of broken glass. They ran along a narrow path worn between snowdrifts. The snow under their feet didn't just crunch, it squealed, betraying their every movement. Nadia pulled Alyosha by the hand, occasionally grabbing him and carrying him a few meters, until her strength didn't leave her. Her slippers almost immediately turned to stone. The rubber couldn't hold the heat. Nadia felt the cold slowly rising from her toes to her ankles, and then higher to her knees. Her legs didn't move, turning into two strange, clumsy pillars. "Mom, it's cold," Alyosha whispered. His voice was barely audible through the scarf. "Let's run, darling, just a little longer. The train is coming soon." Nadia wheezed. Her throat was torn by the icy air. It seemed to her that behind her, in the depths of the village, lights had already flared up. She could hear the roar of Victor's truck engine, although common sense told her that he was still asleep. Phantom fear drove her forward faster than any blizzard. The station was only 2 kilometers away, but these kilometers seemed endless. Nadia fell several times, scraping her hands on the icy crust, but then the pursuit, driven by terror, would jump up. She could no longer feel her legs. It seemed to her that she was running on stumps. The thought that she could lose her legs flashed and disappeared. If only he didn't catch us. If only he didn't touch Alyosha. The railway embankment appeared before them like a saving shore. In the distance, through the veil of snow dust, the dim yellow eye of a locomotive appeared. The train was moving slowly. Nadia trudged through the Siberian snowdrifts, pushing hard. She jumped out onto the platform. There was not a soul there. Only a lone lantern swayed in the wind, casting long, eerie shadows. The train approached the platform, shrouded in clouds of steam. The carriages were covered in a crust of ice. Nadia rushed to the nearest door. It opened with difficulty. A sleepy conductor in a heavy sheepskin coat appeared in the opening. She looked at the strange couple, an exhausted woman with wild eyes, in a light coat and galoshes on her bare feet, and a child who looked like a tiny bundle. "Where are you going, my dears?" She gasped. "In this frost. Do you have tickets? Please." Nadia grabbed the handrails with icy fingers. "Please save us. I have money. I will pay. Just get us out of here." The conductor looked at Nadia's face. In the light of the station lantern, blue and yellow marks from old beatings were clearly visible, which even the frost could not hide. She turned her gaze to Nadia's boots, already filled with snow. "Jesus Christ!" the woman whispered. "Quickly into the car, give the little one here." She grabbed Alyosha and literally dragged Nadia inside. The door slammed, cutting off the cold and darkness of the taiga. The conductor led them into her service compartment, where it was hot and smelled of coal. She began to pull off her icy boots. Her socks stuck to her skin. "Quiet, quiet, girl. We'll warm up soon," she said, rubbing Nadia's blue feet with a rough towel. "I'll hide you in the service compartment. Don't get off until the junction. You'll have to change there." The train jerked, clanked its buffers, and slowly began to pick up speed. Nadia looked out the window as the dim lights of the village, the barracks, and the taiga floated past. All of this was fading into the past, turning into a terrible dream. She hugged Alyosha and crossed herself for the first time in 5 years. She didn't yet know that the unknown of a communal apartment and hard work lay ahead. She knew only one thing: they were free. And at that moment, that was the most important thing in the world. Leningrad greeted us not with the ceremonial splendor of palaces, but with a low, gray, damp sky, which seemed to cling with its belly to the spires and roofs. After the endless, oppressive silence of the taiga and black barracks, this city was deafening. It fell upon us with the ringing of trams, the shuffling of thousands of souls on granite, the honking of cars, and some special, unlike anything else, smell. A complex mixture of river dampness, fresh bread, exhaust fumes, and old wet stone. We got off at the Peronsky station, looking around like little animals emerging from a hole. Alyosha was squeezing my hand painfully, hiding his face in the collar of his old coat. Aunt Valia, a distant relative of my mother whom I last saw about 10 years ago, met us at the train car. She was a loud, imposing woman with a high hairstyle tightly held in place with hairspray and a deep, commanding bass voice that easily drowned out the noise of the station bustle. "Oh my God, Nadka!" she gasped, clasping her hands, and her painted eyes widened. "Who do you look like? They're putting Krasha in a coffin. Only shadows remained." She looked at my bruises, which in the cold, whitish Leningrad light seemed even brighter and more terrible, at my ridiculous shoes, at trembling Alyosha. "And the young man is a young man, thin as a sliver, with only eyes on his face. Well, why are you standing here? Quickly, get into a taxi. No need to rub calluses on the police's eyes here. You look like pure refugees." Aunt Valia's communal apartment on the Petrograd side resembled a huge, buzzing beehive, living by its own tangled laws. The long, dim corridor was filled with chests, bicycles hanging on the walls, and old wooden cabinets. It smelled thick and rich here: fried fish, sour cabbage soup, and laundry soap. In the kitchen, on 10 burners at once, something was boiling, hissing, and bubbling, creating a curtain of steam. Neighbors, an elderly, an intelligent couple, a bespectacled, chain-smoking student, and a stern cashier from the grocery store looked at us, the new tenants, with curiosity but without malice. To them, we were just another family member visiting. However, after a week, it became clear that this couldn't go on for much longer. "Nadia, you understand." Valia sat down on the edge of my creaky camp bed when Alyosha finally fell asleep after a restless day. "I'm not kicking you out. Stay as long as you need. There's room." But the local police officer had already stopped by and asked, "Who are you? Where are you from? Why isn't your child in kindergarten? You don't have a Leningrad registration. And you won't get one just like that. It's a closed, strict city." She lowered her voice. "And without a residence permit now, you'll be stuck until the first patrol. They'll catch you, check your documents, and send you back to your Siberia in 24 hours, like a slob and a passport violator. That's the law." I felt a chill run through me, as if I were back on that snowy road without my boots. The thought of going back, of Victor getting to us again, was like a death sentence. "What should I do, Aunt Valia?" "Really back?" I whispered, feeling panic rising in my throat. There was only one way out: a girl. Go to the limit. There are places where, for the most menial, the hardest work, they give a temporary residence permit and company housing. The city is always in need of street cleaners. Leningrad. It loves snow, you know, but there's no one to clear it. The locals turn up their noses. The work is back-breaking. You'll break your back, but at least you'll get a foothold. You'll cling with your teeth. You'll stay. That's how my new life began. My morning now began at 5 o'clock, when the city was still sleeping under the murky, heavy blanket of dawn. Instead of a cozy office and papers, which I once dreamed of in my youth, my tools became a heavy crowbar polished by my palms, a wide plywood shovel, and a stiff broom. The winter of 1981 in Leningrad turned out to be capricious and cruel. The snow fell thick, wet, heavy, and by nightfall it had hardened into an icy shell, turning the courtyards into skating rinks. I'd go out into the yard, wrapped in a government-issued orange vest over my padded jacket. I had to clear the paths down to the asphalt before 8 a.m., before people went to work, to chip away at the ice at the entrances and sprinkle everything with sand. It was a war. A war with ice, with snow, with my own weakness. My hands, already calloused from the collective farm, were now rough and red, like raw meat. My skin, cracked from constant contact with icy water, reagents and salt, and bled. My back burned like fire. Sometimes I'd stop, leaning on a crowbar and swallowing tears of helplessness and pain. I wanted to give up, fall into this snowdrift, and fall asleep. But then I remembered Victor. I remembered the creaking of whetstone and a knife in that Siberian kitchen. I remembered Alyosha's eyes when he hid under the bed, and anger, cold, saving anger, gave me strength. I picked up the crowbar again, and it bit into the ice with a dull ringing sound. It was as if I was hammering my freedom into this Leningrad asphalt with each blow. After 3 months of hard labor, the boss, Zhika, a gloomy man who always smelled like a prima donna, threw a bunch of keys on my desk. "Here you go, Kryukovo. The office is free. A basement, of course, but livable. We'll get temporary registration." It was a tiny room in the semi-basement of the same building where I cleaned the yard. The window was almost at sidewalk level, covered with bars, and all I could see were the shoes and boots of passers-by hurrying about their business. The room was damp and smelled of mold and cats. Along the ceiling, thick heating pipes, wrapped in fiberglass, ran through the building, humming monotonously like a living organism. But on the day I first walked in there with Alyosha and set our only suitcase on the concrete floor, I was happy, as I hadn't been happy in the palace. I approached the shabby door and slowly, with pleasure, turned the key in the lock. The click of the latch echoed in my soul, a triumphant chord. "That's it, Alyoshenka," I whispered, kneeling down in front of my son and hugging him. "We're home now. This is our home. No one will enter here without our permission. No one has the right. Do you understand? This little rusty iron bolt became the most valuable thing in my life." For the first time in many years, I could undress, go to bed, and know that no one would rip the blanket off me in the middle of the night, no one would hit me in the back, no one would take a lump of sugar from my child. I slept to the sound of Goltrup, as if to a lullaby. Time passed. By 1983, we had settled in a little. I got used to the rhythm of the big city, learned not to get lost on the metro. Alyosha went to first grade. He was a serious, silent boy who studied so fervently, so diligently, as if his mother's life depended on every A in his copybook. He never asked for toys, understanding the value of every penny, but fear did not gone. It didn't disappear. It just lurked somewhere deep inside, in the subcortex, like a splinter of an old mine that begins to ache in bad weather. It happened on a warm, golden September day. I received a bonus and decided to throw us a celebration. We went for a walk on Nevsky Prospect. The city was elegant, festive. Sunbeams played on the spires of the Admiralty. It smelled of freshly ground coffee, expensive perfume, and fallen leaves. We stood in a frozen line at the famous Sèvres Café. I laughed, listening to Alyosha discuss what kind of school bag he would like. And suddenly my gaze, sliding over the crowd, stumbled upon the figure of a man standing at the crosswalk. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray cap pushed back on his head. He stood with his back to us, but it was his gait. It was a habit of leaning slightly to the left side when he stands and nervously twitching my shoulder. The world around me instantly darkened, collapsed. The sounds of the city, laughter, music, the hum of the cars disappeared, replaced by a growing booming pounding of blood in my ears. The air became unbearably thick, and I couldn't breathe. Victor flashed through my head, burning my brain. I found it. It seemed to me that he would slowly turn around, see us, and his face would distort into that same dead, anticipatory grin. I felt a sticky, cold sweat run down my back, and my legs became weak, unable to take a step. Animal terror paralyzed me in the middle of the festive crowd. "Mom, what's wrong?" Alyosha tugged my hand. "The line is coming." I didn't answer. I grabbed my son by the shoulder, squeezing it so hard that the boy gasped in pain. Without making out the road, I rushed away from Svetly Prospect. I dragged him along with me, dragging him into the dark passageways of the well, weaving between the garbage bins, without looking back. My heart pounded against my ribs like a caught bird, ready to tear the ribcage apart. It seemed to me that the heavy, confident steps Victor's voices echoed behind me, bouncing off the stone walls. Only when I reached my basement closet did I slam the door shut, throw the chain on, and slide down the wall to the floor, gasping for air. Mom, he's here. Dad found us. Alyosha stood over me. His face was white, his lips were trembling, and his eyes were frozen in that same familiar Siberian horror we'd fled from. I forced myself to rise on shaky legs. I went to the low window and carefully peered out from behind the curtain. There was no one on the sidewalk except old lady Savaska and a couple of students. I took a deep breath, trying to stop my hands from shaking. No, son, I mistook. It just looks similar. Forgive me, darling. It scared me. I knew in my mind that it wasn't Victor. He couldn't have found us in this multi-million-dollar anthill. He had no address, no money for a ticket, no brains for such a search. But this attack of panic made it clear to me, I will never be completely free as long as he's alive. He became my shadow, my personal demon, always standing over my left shoulder. In the mid-'80s, a man appeared in my life whom our entire housing office simply called Uncle Kolya. He worked as a tow truck driver. He was a stocky, strong man with hands perpetually stained with fuel oil, the smell of gasoline, and incredibly kind, laughing eyes with a mesh of wrinkles. At first, he simply helped me with work. He would sharpen a crowbar on the machine, help me lift a heavy garbage bin into the car, or simply treat me to an apple. Then he began coming into our closet for tea. He would bring Alyosha broken mechanical toys that he found somewhere, and together they would spend hours tinkering with them with a screwdriver, bringing plastic all-terrain vehicles and wind-up chickens back to life. Nadia, why are you living like a recluse? He said one evening when we were sitting in the kitchen and drinking tea with pretzels. The woman is still young and beautiful, but her eyes are like an old woman's. Let's go to the cinema on Sunday. They say they show Love and Doves, a funny picture, heartfelt. I looked at his wide, reliable palms lying on the oilcloth. Kolya was good, very good. He smelled of a car, tobacco, and honest work. Alyosha was drawn to him. For the first time in a long time, a low male laughter sounded in our house, which did not foreshadow trouble and beatings. But when Kolya, emboldened, carefully tried to cover my hand with his, I recoiled as if from a burn. Abruptly, frightened, a teaspoon clinked on a saucer. Don't, Kolya, please, don't touch me. Why, Natya? He was confused and removed his hand. I'm serious. I won't hurt you. I would have accepted Alyosha as my own. I don't have any of my own. I'm burned out, Kolya. I looked him straight in the eyes, and he stopped short, seeing in them that icy black abyss that I carried within me. There is nothing left inside me for a man. There is ashes there, only fear and the desire not to be touched. I have a son. That will be enough for me for the rest of my life. Don't be offended, you are a golden man, but I can't belong to someone anymore. I can't trust. My own head on my shoulders and my son's peaceful sleep have cost me too much. Kolya sighed, was silent, finished his tea, and never spoke of feelings again. He remained a friend. He taught Alyosha to fix a bike, helped us move when we were given a better room, but I remained a closed fortress for him. I chose loneliness as the only guarantee that no one could ever hurt me again. In 1989, when the country was already seething with change, in my mail there was a letter in the box. The envelope was addressed in my mother's familiar, flowing handwriting, which I hadn't seen for many years. My hands shook so much that I could hardly open it. Over the years, we exchanged only dry postcards for the holidays. My father forbade her to write to me. The letter contained only a few lines, written hastily with blots of tears. Nadia, my daughter, your father Ivan Petrovich, is no more. He died on Thursday, quietly passed away in his sleep, far from my heart. Just before his death, when he was already very ill and could not get up, he called me. He was holding the very same broken icon that we glued together in his hands. Nadia was crying. For the first time in my life, I saw him cry. He asked me to tell you. Forgive me, daughter. Fool. I was old, proud, I listened to people, but I sent my own blood to hell. You are the only one of us who has become a real person. Your back has not bent, you have not broken. I am proud of her, Masha." With these words, he introduced himself. "Forgive him too, my daughter, if you can." I sat at the table in my small kitchen, and the tears I'd been saving for years, squeezing them inside like a spring, finally burst forth. These weren't the bitter, caustic tears of despair I'd choked on in the Siberian barracks. These were tears of purification. The stone I'd carried in my soul, considering myself rejected, a slice cut off, had finally begun to crumble and crumble to dust. My father's confession, even just before his death, had restored to me the right to my own past, root and branch. The next day, I went to the nearest church. I didn't know the prayers, didn't know how to light candles properly. I simply stood before the icon of the Mother of God, whole, shining with gold and goodness, and whispered, "I forgive you, Papa. God is my witness. I forgive you. Sleep peacefully." At that moment, it seemed as if the air in the church had become lighter, more transparent, and the eternal roar of the corpse in my soul had subsided. I let go of the resentment, and with it, a huge portion of the leaden weight that had been preventing me from breathing deeply disappeared. The 90s swept over the country like a storm wind, shattering destinies and sweeping away old laws. There was shooting all around, markets were being divided, people were losing jobs and hope. But for me, those years became a time of quiet pride. Alyosha had grown up. He hadn't become a driver or a laborer as Victor had once dreamed of, prophesying his destiny as a real man with a bottle in his hand. My son, seeing me coming home exhausted, counting pennies, made his choice. He entered the university's law department. He studied voraciously, working nights, working part-time as a loader, but he never dropped out. "Mom," he said to me one day when he brought home his first serious intern salary and a bag of groceries, sausage, fruit, and candy that I hadn't seen in years, "you won't swing a crowbar anymore. That's enough. I'm the man in this house now. I'll get you out of this basement, I promise." And he kept his word. By the end of the 90s, he was already working in a reputable law firm. I looked at him, tall, broad-shouldered, in a clean, pressed suit, with intelligent, calm eyes, and I saw strength in him, but not the terrible, animal-like strength his father had, which only destroyed and suppressed. Alyosha had the strength to create and protect. He never raised his voice. He always offered me his hand when he got off the bus, and there was such careful tenderness in his gaze that my heart ached. We moved from our office block to a spacious, bright two-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. When I first entered the new, sun-drenched living room, I went to the window. There were no footsteps, no dirt, and no bars here. Here were the tops of green trees and a vast, clear sky. "Did we win, son?" I asked quietly, afraid to believe it. "We won, Mom," Alyosha answered, coming up from behind and hugging me by the shoulders with his strong arms. "It's over. No one will ever hurt you again. I'll see to it." I closed my eyes and pressed my cheek to his sleeve. I felt my son's warmth and understood that my entire terrible journey through beatings, through humiliation, through the icy taiga, in galoshes on my bare feet, through the heavy crowbar of a janitor, was worth this one moment. The light of Leningrad, the light of my son's love, had finally dispelled the darkness of my past. The summer of 2025 was unusually gentle in St. Petersburg, generous with sunshine and quiet, windless evenings. At our dacha near Zelenogorsk, in the shade of century-old ship pines, the air was thick and sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine and the pine needles warmed by the day. I stood on the open veranda, resting my palms on the warm wooden railing. I had turned 70, but in the reflection of the dark window pane, I saw not the haggard gray woman with the haunted gaze I had been in the Siberian barracks 45 years earlier, but a remnant of gray-haired woman in a linen dress. My shoulders were straightened, and the wrinkles around my eyes now resembled not the scars of pain, but sunbeams, traces of smiles, which in the past decades had been far more numerous in my life than tears. On the large round table, covered with a lace tablecloth, my signature apple pie with cinnamon was cooling, huge, ruddy, smelling of home and comfort. I picked up a knife and slowly, with relish, began cutting it into even, neat pieces. I looked at my hands, narrow, dry, with visible veins and barely noticeable spots of pigment. They weren't shaking. That small, treacherous, humiliating tremor that had haunted me for many years after my escape was gone forever. The hands that once bit into the ice with a heavy crowbar, beating it until it bled for the sake of registration, were now light, calm, and obedient. "Grandma, Grandma, look what a pine cone you found." My 10-year-old granddaughter, Nadia, ran out of the garden, her sandals stomping on the wooden deck. She was amazing, so heartbreakingly beautiful. She was just like me as a child. The same huge, wide-open, lake-gray eyes and unruly shock of sun-bleached light brown hair. Only there was no fear in her eyes. They held only happiness and confidence that the world loved her, that no one would hurt her. A beautiful igaza. Put it on the shelf, it's a collection. I smiled and stroked her warm head. Run and wash your hands. Dad will be home soon. Alexei, who had already turned 50, was now a respectable man, respected throughout the city. He ran a large law firm, and his name was associated with impeccable honesty and steely integrity. But at home, with me, he became the same loving son. He protected me so carefully, as if trying to compensate for all the warmth and protection I had been deprived of in my youth. He built an invisible fortress of care around me, its walls impenetrable to even a draft from the past. The phone rang on a Saturday afternoon when the house was filled with the lazy languor of a siesta. My cell phone, lying on the hallway nightstand, suddenly began to ring with a sharp, alarming melody, breaking the dacha silence. I picked it up. An unfamiliar number glowed on the screen, with the area code of a distant Siberian region, those same numbers I thought I'd forgotten half a century ago, erased from my memory. Something stirred inside, an old, cold, sticky echo. My heart skipped a beat, but then evened out. I paused for a second, took a deep breath, looking at the pine trees, and pressed the green button. "Hello." My voice sounded even and firm. Nadezhda Kryukova, is that you?" The voice on the other end was female, cracked, hoarse, and very, very old. "It was Galina, your former neighbor. Remember, from the barracks in Seversk, Aunt Sharada died long ago. God rest her soul, and here I am, still creaking." I sat down on the edge of the wicker chair. Images of the past, which I had so carefully cemented into the cellars of my memory, flared for a moment with a bright, painful light. The icy walls of the barracks, the smell of fumes, the sound of a sharpening knife. "I remember, Galina, of course I remember." "Hello." "How many years have passed?" "Yeah, almost. A whole lifetime has flown by." The woman on the other end sighed heavily, and the receiver rustled like dry autumn leaves. "Why am I calling, Nadia?" "I found your number through the grapevine from your distant niece who lives in the area. You're Victor's Vidka. So we buried him today. I decided I should tell you. He's a father to your son, after all, in a way that your ex-husband isn't." I closed my eyes. I expected the ground to fall out from under me, or a heavy hammer of panic to pound in my temples, like it used to at the mention of his name. But nothing happened. Silence. A complete, absolute, ringing calm in my soul. No pain, no malice, no fear. Only a strange feeling of emptiness, as if the last terrible page had finally been torn out of an old, tattered book. "How did he die?" I asked simply to break the drawn-out silence. "Yes, he died just as Nadia lived." Galina spat, and the sound reached me across thousands of kilometers, instantly returning me to that harsh reality. A dog's death. He drank himself to death completely towards the end, lost his humanity. He lived out his last 10 years in that very barracks, in your former room. The house had been slated for demolition for a long time. All the normal people had left, and he sat there like an owl in the ruins. There was no work. He'd been fired from the logging company back in the 90s for drunkenness and theft. He'd hang around the store, begging passers-by for change for a flask. Galina paused, choosing her words carefully, as if afraid to offend me or defile my ears. You know, Nadia, he was a local joke. Gorakov the jester. Everyone made fun of him. The kids threw stones at him. When he was drunk, and even when sober, he'd always tell stories. He'd sit in the mud outside the general store, dirty, toothless, in rags, yelling at the whole street, shaking his fist, "Don't touch me!" I have a son in St. Petersburg, a big boss. He wears gold and drives a Mercedes. He'll be here soon and take me, Dad, to his mansion. You'll all be dancing to my tune then. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My son, my Alyosha, whom he wanted to break, had become his last, albeit imaginary, hope. And the men walk by, kick him like a mangy dog and laugh. Who needs you, Vitka? You drank away your son, back when he was a toddler. You forgot how you beat your pregnant wife. You'll die here under the fence, and no one will remember, and no one will put a cross on you. And what about him? I asked quietly, almost in a whisper. And why was he crying? Sometimes he would smear drunken snot across his unshaven face, and more often he would go wild, throwing his fists at people, but he had no strength left. He would only fall into the mud. So he lived in an eternal lie, choking in his anger, and they found him only a week later. The neighbors smelled something was wrong. The door was broken down. Galina sighed so heavily, as if she had been carrying this load herself. He froze to death, Nadia, in a drunken stupor. His window was broken. I stuffed him with some rags, rotten vests, but it didn't help. You know how cold it is here. He lay on the floor in an empty room, huddled right under the wall where you and Alyoshka once slept. He had no one left, no friends, no women, no relatives. They buried him today at government expense, like a homeless person, at the very end of the cemetery, where the nameless lie. There isn't even a proper plaque, just one stake. I listened to this story, and a terrible, pitiful picture arose before my eyes. An old, fallen man in a frozen, rotten barracks, dying alone among the ghosts of his own lies and cruelty. This was not a triumph. This was not the sweet revenge they write about in novels. This was the spectacle of total, absolute collapse of life. The boomerang did not return to him in the form of a fiery lightning bolt from the sky. He was not punished by the court or by someone's strong hand. He was punished by emptiness, the very same icy emptiness that he had built around himself, burning out all living things, betraying everyone who loved him. Evil devoured itself, leaving not even a bone. Thank you, Galina, for calling. Thank you, I said sincerely. Change it if you can. I'll remember it, what can I say? God be his judge, Nadia. Live long. You deserve it. I put the phone down on the table and for a long time, motionless, looked out the window at the pine branches swaying in the light wind. I didn't feel joy. Rather, it was a feeling of deep, hard-won peace. As if I had closed a very old, dusty, scary book, which I was once afraid to even pick up, and put it away on the farthest shelf. Forever. The story is over. In the evening, when the sun began to set, painting the sky in gentle peach tones, I asked Alexei to take me to the Gulf of Finland. My son was surprised, but he didn't argue. He saw from my face that I needed it. We stood on the granite embankment, watching the huge, gray, eternal water lazily lick the stone. The wind blew strands of hair from my face. It smelled salt, seaweed, and freedom. Alexei stood next to me, tall, broad-shouldered, reliable as a rock. He didn't ask about anything. He always sensed my condition without unnecessary words. "You know, Lyosha?" I said, without taking my eyes off the horizon, where the water merged with the sky. "Today I found out that your father is no longer here." Alexei only slightly shrugged his shoulder. His face remained calm, inscrutable. Not a shadow of grief, not a shadow of gloating. For him, Viktor Kryukov was just a foggy, half-forgotten nightmare from early childhood, a black shadow with a knife in his hands, from which we once fled into the polar night. "God will judge him, Mom," he said quietly, covering my hand with his. "He died for us a long time ago. That night when you carried me out of the barracks in Galoshi? You're right, son." I nodded and shook his hand. His palm was warm and strong. But today I understood the most important thing, what perhaps has kept me going all these years. Evil never wins in the long run. Never. It can beat, break bones, frighten, make you hide under the bed, but it has no future. It is sterile. It always devours itself. I turned to my son, looking into his eyes, the intelligent, kind eyes of a man who knows how to love and protect. Viktor thought he was strong, that he was the master of life because he could hit a woman or a child. But he was weakness, pitiful weakness. And I, the one he considered his property, dust under his feet. I survived, I persevered, and you grew up to be a real person. You started a family, you are honest, you are respected. This is our greatest victory. His greatest retribution. He died in the dirt, forgotten in the family, and we stand here, in light and love. Our mouth continues, but its trace has vanished. I turned to the bay, and my voice grew stronger. It seemed to me that now I was speaking not only to my son, but also to that young, frightened Nadia who ran through the snow in her galoshes, and to thousands of other women who are right now sitting in their dark kitchens, covering up bruises and afraid to look up. Dear women, if only you could hear me, you have only one life, unique, unrepeatable, precious. And God gave it to me so that you could be someone's punching bag, a servant, or a wordless shadow. Not so that you would endure humiliation for the sake of the mythical preservation of the family, for the sake of pants in the house, or for the sake of the children, for the sake of the children. Go away. Don't believe words, vows, and tears of repentance. Believe only in deeds. If a beast has settled in the house, run. Run barefoot, in galoshes, without money. What have you got? Bruises on the body will heal, bones will grow together, but a trampled soul, a broken faith in yourself, never heals. Don't be afraid of silence and solitude. They are 1,000 times more honest and kinder than a false, poisonous love with the taste of blood. I took a deep breath, inhaling the salty air, which seemed to me the sweetest in the world. Justice exists, I've checked. And it doesn't begin in the courts, not with the police. It begins from the very moment when you first turn the key with trembling hands in the lock that belongs only to you, when you first fall asleep without fear, knowing that no one will enter. Alexei came up from behind and carefully put his arm around my shoulders, shielding me from the wind with his jacket. "Shall we go home, Mom?" he asked quietly. The evening was already getting chilly. Nadia and my wife were waiting for us. The tea was getting cold. I smiled. I felt the ancient, aching wound I'd inflicted on myself jumping onto a departing train in -40-degree weather finally heal inside me, disappearing. Now I was whole, absolutely whole. Let's go, son. The grandchildren are waiting, and the apple pie is still warm. We walked to the car, and I stepped lightly and confidently on the solid Leningrad granite. The sunset slowly, majestically faded over the city, painting the sky in soft pastel tones, pink, gold, lilac. The shadow of the past, which had haunted me for 45 years, breathing down my neck, finally dissolved in this light without a trace. Neither fear nor hatred remained in my soul, only wisdom and great quiet gratitude to God for every day of freedom lived. Life went on, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. Dear friends, thank you for being with us and listening to this story. We would be very pleased to hear your impressions. Share them in the comments. And if you have your own stories, be sure to write them. We might even feature them in future episodes. Subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more to come.